When you consider art and the radical subjectivity that its agents present us with, the idea of ranking, the best, the greatest, it becomes ridiculous. But when you watch Jason Samuel Smith dance, you can't help but think to yourself that you're watching one of the best tap dancers on earth. His credits are simply astonishing, and probably only surpassed by his skill. Sitting down with him, he offered us a lesson by giving us a glimpse into the tap dance renaissance of the 1980s that gave birth to his passion, and that still continues to feed his desire to mine the depths of rhythm and humanity. The Interviews is a series about survival, how to survive in a life of tap. In pursuit of this question, it is with great pleasure that we sit down with Jason Samuel Smith.
And then we have on Monster Tap, we have Jason Samuels.
Within the community of tap dance, I felt like I was embraced immediately. And from day one, I had a place at the table. Even if it was the small little table on the side, I still had somewhere to eat. My mom is a jazz dancer. She taught and teaches currently in New York City. She moved to New York when she was about 19 years old and started studying with my father, JoJo Smith, who at the time was developing his style of jazz and his approach to the dance. And she rapidly became one of his top students. They developed a relationship, and eventually they built a studio together called JoJo's Dance Factory. And JoJo's Dance Factory became one of the hubs in New York City for all dancers to come and train. It became like a serious training ground for people who wanted to improve and just practice and get better. And, at that time in New York, most dance studios were just individual teachers' studios. So you had the Henry Latang studio, you had the Phil Black studio, you had Frank Hatchett's studio. There weren't these mega studios that housed, every style of dance and had all these teachers. My father and my mother were some of the first people to kind of start this idea of having every style of dance under the same roof, and the quality was high. So then JoJo's Dance Factory, eventually they sold it to the Hines family, Gregory and Maurice and Pops Hines, to them, and also to Frank Hatchett. So the studio became Hines, and Hatchett. And then from there, they turned it into the Broadway Dance Center. Richard Eldner bought it from them, and he turned it into the Broadway Dance Center. But essentially, it was the same studio. That was my foundation in dance. I grew up at the time when the studio already became the Broadway Dance Center, but I saw all these great teachers in every style of dance. Frank Hatchett, Finest Young, Judy Basson, who was my first tap teacher. And then people like Savion Glover started teaching there as well. It was a great space, beautiful studios, all wood floors, and every studio was visible from the street. You could walk down Broadway and see 6 or 7 classes going on. And you could see the windows fogging up from the sweat, accumulation. It was so raw, like it made you so curious about what was happening in that building. This was my childhood. I was there every single day waiting for my mother to finish teaching class. It was a really interesting time in the 80s, particularly the late 80s, because, people like Gregory Hines were emerging, as popular figures. And I saw the movie White Nights when I was a kid, just on television. And then eventually when the movie Tap came out, that was also a big motivation to say, wow, like, even though I'm watching all these older tap dancers, share together, like, that culture was so strong, even on film, to see these guys jamming and challenging each other in this stage of life. Something just clicked in my head. And then I was exposed to great shows like Black and Blue. I saw Black and Blue when I was 8 years old. Bunny Briggs and Jimmy Slide on stage, Lon Chaney. I mean, these images, like the images of Bunny Briggs going across the stage doing In a Sentimental Mood, like in the most subtle, you know, just choice, particular way, you know, like everything meant something. The way he carried his hands and his eyes, and you know, where his focus was in the theater and the direction in which he danced. It wasn't just about the steps or the rhythms he was creating. It was about the entire vibe. And even though I was 8, I still kind of understood, like, this is special because of how old this guy is. Not because, oh, you know, he's a tap dancer, this is really cool to see him dance. No, he's a great storyteller. And because he's lived this long and had this much great experience, he's able to convey this artistry, tell these stories in the most beautiful, dynamic ways, you know, from very loud, aggressive rhythms, you know, compact steps, to very subtle, light, you know, fluttering nerve taps, to, you know, just very light touches on the stage, to hard, you know, dropping the hammer, you know, like there was just such a range of emotion that was filled in this one piece, aside from the entire show of seeing all these great tap dancers and singers. But to be in New York in the 80s, you were witnessing like this renaissance of tap in a new generation that you didn't really see existing before. And a lot of it had to do with Gregory and these elders that started to resurface and come back to the public eye. And, you know, I connected with Greg personally because I felt like, okay, he's a tap dancer. He's from New York. He has a similar, you know, background. We were both mixed. Growing up primarily with my mother, who was white, and her family, it was interesting to have that perspective, because in society I'm not necessarily viewed as being white, but you know, half of my family is. So I got to have that experience with that side of my family. And then later on, as I got older, I developed a relationship with my father and his side of the family. And so to see, you know, my white family, my black family independently, and to just have two completely different vibes and kind of energies and histories, you know, it definitely shaped my personality. As I started getting deeper into the art form of tap, the history of it, the lineage, the individuals who have contributed to it, I started to identify my race with my cultural identity, which is really tap dance. And I find tap culture to be black culture. Even though, you know, so many people define tap as being this mold of Irish and African styles blended, I still find it to be more of a black art form that exists in many communities now, but really has survived and lived through the black community up to this point. Because if you consider the evolution of tap throughout the generations, you know, if you look at Irish step dance, it has evolved, yes, but you can look at Irish step dance maybe 50 years or 100 years ago, and it's going to be very similar to the way it is now. If you look at tap, it has evolved. The vocabulary has developed, the musical choices and use of the dance has developed. You could say the same about jazz. You could say jazz is European and African, but it's really a black art form, and it's a platform for expression for the people who are oppressed. And it's the same thing with tap. Tap dance was, to me, a way for people to reconnect with their own roots and history, particularly in the United States, where people were denied their name, their religion, their culture. Everything was taken. The rhythm and the traditions of expressing yourself through the dance and through music and through song, those traditions were not lost. And tap dance preserved those traditions all the way from West Africa all the way to the diaspora of Africa in the Americas. So many artists had no options, particularly because of the racial barriers. the same opportunities were not available for black artists as they were for white artists. So a lot of white artists would either study or have these experiences in the black community and then take that experience or information and then put it on a platform where these black artists had no access. In turn, a lot of these black artists had tons of material stolen and used, and people profited off of things they created. A lot of these artists, a lot of these elder black artists would talk about it. Later in life, they would say, be careful, don't let people steal your stuff. Don't let people take your this and that, and don't give it away. And now we have, every culture in the world participating, which is beautiful because that's what you want any art form to expand into, is something that includes everybody.
Yo, I can give it to you whether I'm spitting the moving feet, tap dance, the original art born in the streets.
Footwork unique, often wonder how an art so deep can have you wondering how to get the beat.
It's the same as any art form. Like, if you're a real visual artist, you're gonna study the history of visual arts to the point where certain artists have already done this kind of work. So if you stumble upon it, you're not gonna go out to the world and start claiming, oh, this is, I came up with this abstract form of art. Like, no, you didn't. There's been generations of people that did that already. If you studied your history, you know that. So I just think when it comes to claiming things, we have to be very careful. And I try not to say, oh, I've created this step, or, this is my material. When it comes to choreography, yes, it's something I created from scratch with a combination of vocabulary I've already had. It's like writing a song. So I feel like I should get a certain kind of credit, and then, hey, maybe even copyright it. The piece that I've been developing and plan to showcase at the Joyce is called Chasing the Bird. And it started as a project called Charlie's Angels, which was one of the ways that I thought I could best pay homage and tribute to Charlie Parker as a musician. Most times when I listen to Charlie Parker's music, he sounds to me as if he's dancing with his instrument. The phrasing, the playfulness. He challenges his listeners with certain kinds of phrases and certain notes and tones. It's fun. It's like a game to him, but yet it's so technically amazing and innovative. The relationship of hearing his music and tap dance and the way that you can phrase rhythms and music within the dance, it just sounds like the same thing. It sounds as if he's tap dancing on his horn. And it makes a lot of sense because his father was a dancer, in the vaudevillian circuit. What would a tap dancer sound like dancing like a pianist, or dancing like a drummer, or dancing like a bassist, or dancing like a saxophonist? And when it comes to horn players, particularly, they have to take breaks because they have to breathe in between their phrases. Whereas somebody like a tap dancer, a drummer, or a pianist can continuously play. Even as we're, taking deep breaths and out of breath or whatever, we can still play because it's not affecting our breathing in the same way. But a horn player, you have to breathe at some point in between. So you have to take breaks. You have to stop. And those breaks and those pauses and that kind of phrasing changes your choreographic approach to the dance. But similar to somebody like Jimmy Slide, who would do the same step and change the ending every time, Charlie Parker would do something very similar musically. He would do a similar lick or a similar phrase, but it was never really exactly the same as he had done it before. So much about being a tap dancer is about improvising. It is about adapting and adjusting to situations, and you know, as a tap dancer, so many times you've probably been to places where they're like, yeah, we got a wood floor, and then you show up and it's marley or it's particle board or plastic or carpet or concrete. I mean, and so in those moments, you have to decide, am I going to do this, or am I going to adjust, or am I going to change it up? Same thing happens even when you're dancing with musicians and they don't play what you discussed or what you've all planned together. It's like, well, who's going to make that adjustment? Is it going to be the musician, or is it going to be me as the tap dancer? Usually it's me as the tap dancer adjusting to the situation. So I feel like the art prepares me for life situations in terms of having to adjust or adapt, and just being prepared for anything. Being a spokesman and an ambassador, not just for tap, but for the entire culture. And getting to travel to a lot of these places, I feel a responsibility for that, because I feel like not just do other tap dancers not get these opportunities, but a lot of people in general don't get to travel to some of these places I go to. Especially young black people, we don't get to see the world as much as other cultures. So we don't get to see these places, and these places don't get to see us. And it's so interesting. Certain places I've been, like India, I mean, first time I went out there, I had a huge afro. I would walk the streets with my fro completely picked out, and it was like, out here, people were following me around because they don't even have hair like that out there. Their hair is straight, it just falls down and boom, boom, boom. You see a dude with a big fro out there, they're like,
that's right, Melanie. You'd never dream of pairing a Kathak Indian dancer and a tap dancer from the streets of New York.
That's
quite
cool,
an
though.
odd couple. Well, they are award-winning dancers on their own right, and together they just jump out and grab you.
I got to meet a great individual named Pandit Chitresh Das, who is a master in Kathak, which is one of the 8 classical dance forms in India. And he brought his company to the American Dance Festival to participate in the show, which I was also invited to by Roxanne Butterfly. And the show featured tap dance, flamenco, and Kathak. So this was basically my introduction to Indian culture. And I was fascinated by, the footwork, by the storytelling, by the use of the hands and the eyebrows and the neck, and, the beautiful clothes they wore, and the odd time meters they were dancing in, and then the fact that there was this, rhythmic musical exchange between the musicians and the dancers, and then between the dancers, and they improvised a lot just like we did in tap. So there was like an instant kinship I felt with Kathak and with these artists in the dance. So through conversations with Chitresh and just spontaneous jam sessions, we decided we wanted to develop a show. We didn't want people to get confused and say, oh, this is fusion and you're taking tap and now blending it with Kathak, or blending it with Indian culture, or you're taking Kathak and you're blending it with tap, or blending it with jazz. We just wanted to find out what happens when these two things meet, and what kind of dialect and what kind of, interaction can happen spontaneously, in those moments. Not planned, not choreographed. The whole show, this show kind of, it was the engine to bring us out to India, because he, as an artist, Pandit Chitresh Das, would travel to India at least twice a year. And eventually we were able to book our performance as a part of his tour. So I went out at, you know, the first time, I think it was 2006. And it was life changing. You know, after the first trip to India, I was ready to like move to the woods, you know, start building my own house from, you know, the trees and nature. You know, I was ready to release all things that I considered to be like, you know, useless. I mean, just seeing how people lived out there and how down to earth people were and how simple life was, but yet how amazing and beautiful it was at the same time. I really connected with that. And I think it changes you in ways, man. It definitely strikes a chord with you. It's hard for people not to be affected by being in that environment. You know, there's so many people, there's so many things stimulating all of your senses all the time. As soon as you get off the plane, you smell like all these foods and, you know, spices and people cooking, or, you know, somebody making chai on the corner, and then you smell garbage and, you know, trash and urine, and then you meet people who, you know, are begging and panhandling and are just trying to like carry your bag from here to there. Then there's another person trying to put your bag in the car, and everybody's got an individual job. You know, there's more services than than needs in India, you know, because there's so many people there. Everybody needs a job, and so once you realize that, then you become a part of the network immediately, you know. And I'm not somebody with a lot of money, but to a lot of these people out there, I was. We started buying food for people because we realized, you know, these people are hungry and they just want to eat. So instead of just giving money, we go to the store, or we take some food, you know, take it away from a restaurant and give it to people. These people would stop in the place they were and sit on the ground right where we gave them the food, and they would start eating it. That's how hungry they were. It wasn't like, yo, thanks, and then walk away. No, they were like, thank you. Sit right there and get busy. And so, you know, it just puts things in perspective. One, it makes you appreciate everything that we have here in our culture, because we do have so many luxuries that we take for granted that we don't realize until we're not using them, that, wow, like, I have a washing machine, you know, or, you know, I have running water. Like, there's just things we take for granted that a lot of people don't have in the world. And India really, you know, it puts those things in perspective. So it's a life-altering experience, and the only reason I went is because of this meeting with Chitresh Das and his company. I was very lucky to have that experience, and I mean, I'm so devastated because he just passed away, and so it's still very fresh to think about. You know, I've known him for 10 years, and we've toured. We've been to India 8 times together. We've been to Australia together. We toured the Hawaiian Islands. You know, we've been here, places in North America that I've never been to. So I'm forever changed because of meeting him and also getting to go to India. It's a life-changing experience. I go to some studios now, and I just kind of laugh and chuckle to myself because I see, you know, people like looking in the mirror and fixing themselves up, or like fully in makeup, or wearing clothes that they look like they might go to a club in. Back in the day, people would come to class specifically to like practice hard for hours, and they didn't care how they looked. They wear, you know, sweaty, torn off sweatshirts and leg warmers and all kinds of crazy looking clothes, but it didn't matter how they looked because they were there to work hard and to improve on their skill. Nowadays, there's just a lot of you know, things are based on a lot of superficiality. If you don't have an image or you don't have a package to sell, then like nobody's interested in your artistry. Where it was backwards back then, you know. It was all about your artistry and what you brought to the table. And then, you know, if you could package it, then that was great. But if not, people still respected your artistry and what you produced. So it's really interesting to see that from my childhood, and now to be around, you know, pop culture now, to see how people are so caught on an image. You know, it confuses me, because I don't know what people consider to be good anymore.